And just some of our guests there recently commenting on the new security laws for Hong Kong, which have now been approved by Beijing at the MPC. Well, let's get more insight. We're joined now by the Managing Director of the Conference Board's China Centre for Economics and Business. David Hoffman is with us, and he joins us now out of Singapore. David, great to have you. We heard from Larry Kudlow overnight saying, essentially reiterating the US stance that Hong Kong essentially now has to be treated like China. We're now expecting new policies to be announced by President Trump as well. How much does this escalation worry you, in particular when it comes to businesses that have interests on both sides?
I mean, this is very worrisome for businesses that have interests on both sides, of course. Businesses look for stability. They look for clarity of policy directions. More than anything, they want stability in the operating environment, certainly not violence and certainly not risks to employees and customers that are with them in Hong Kong. And they're concerned for the Hong Kong people, because basically this fight taking place between the U.S. and China over trade and many other topics that is now taking place, or a battlefield of it, is in Hong Kong, more than anything, hurts the Hong Kong people, depending on how it plays out.
It's interesting you talk about the desire for stability and certainty, which is certainly, I think, what a lot of people have been hoping for Hong Kong over the past year or so. And in fact, a lot of supporters of this bill say that's exactly what it's intended to inject, to put an end to these protests, to restore calm to the city. That's not likely to be the way it plays out, though?
You know, that is problematic. So the businesses, of course, are concerned about the instability caused by protests and would like to see a peaceful resolution. The problem with the injection of a national security law component from Beijing into the Hong Kong Basic Law is that it would introduce a high degree of uncertainty about the definition of national security, how it will be applied. In China, Chinese law is always defined in a very broad, ambiguous way, which essentially gives Chinese regulators complete discretion over outcomes. It is more rule by law or rule by man than it is rule of law, whereas in Hong Kong, terms matter, definitions matter, scope matters, and what makes Western business and frankly Asian business so comfortable in Hong Kong is the fact that they can count on the word of law and legal process based on transparency to assure outcomes. So it's a clash of systems at its core. The China state capitalist system versus the Western, market capitalist system, and especially on legal terms, the two systems just don't play well together.
Every time we speak to pro-democracy activists or people who are really advocating for more freedoms across the city, we hear the same argument that this had been promised to Hong Kong during the handover. But I really can't hear a stronger argument about what can be done with Beijing taking a stronger stance on the city. Do you have any ideas of what else Hong Kong protesters, democracy movements could do at this point?
Well, certainly resorting to violence doesn't help the situation. And again, I'm not on the ground there, so can't speak from firsthand knowledge, but it appears that only happens with a very small cohort of overall protesters. I think that, the problem with Article 23 unfortunately escalated very quickly, due to a series of inactions and mistakes that happened on both sides. And it's now gotten to a point where one side needs to give. My view would be that Beijing has not really offered an off-ramp, nor the Hong Kong leadership, and so protesters are growing increasingly aggravated with the situation. many of their requests, it seems, around an independent inquiry and some degree of transparency on this situation, seem quite reasonable. And I think, continued agitation in a peaceful way is really the only option they have.
David, we continue to hear from not only Beijing, but also the Hong Kong leadership, the chief executive, Carrie Lam, coming out and saying that citizens will continue to enjoy freedom of speech. So they seem to portray it in a way that really nothing much will change in Hong Kong. Then why does Beijing feel that they need to move now?
Well, why Beijing feels it needs to move now is anybody's guess. I mean, it could be due to a confluence of reasons. One thing for sure is that it is a demonstration of power on Beijing's part, and why the leadership there feels the need to assert this power at this juncture, is a topic worthy of a lot of speculation. Again, on the freedoms side, the Hong Kong liberties side, this is where this definition of national security becomes so problematic, because it's very all-encompassing. If you look at the national security framework that was introduced in China in 2018, it is very broad. It contains, I think it itemizes 8 to 10 components, whether it's economy, politics, culture, so on and so forth. It's hard to find a category that doesn't constitute a national security risk. Maybe sports is the only one. It's hard to know. But the problem with the law is that it injects a whole lot of uncertainty. It is up to Beijing to decide whether and when, what aspects of freedom of speech are permissible and what is prohibited, and it's a moving goalpost. It's a murky definition, and that in and of itself is what makes everyone so uncomfortable, the lack of specificity.
David Hoffman, great having you with us, the Conference Board Managing Director of the China Center for Economics and Business.